Welcome, everybody. Welcome, everybody. We're going to have a fantastic afternoon for you. We welcome guests from all over this region. We've got a ton of people here. We've got time zones from New Zealand right the way to Perth. So the guys in New Zealand, they get to eat their cocktails at a reasonable time, whereas the guys in Perth, they get to eat their cocktails at lunchtime. Everybody ready for some fun this afternoon? We've got a fabulous talk from Shara Evans, futurist, and followed that by cocktails. How good is that on a Friday afternoon? So I'm going to hand over very quickly to my colleagues, but I'll just give a bit of housekeeping. Look, you're all muted by default right now, but this is actually an interactive event, especially when we get to the cocktails. That's clearly going to be interactive. But in the meantime, when Shara is speaking, if you have some questions to her, there's a chat box, there's a chat thing down the bottom. You can send a question to Shara, and at the end of her presentation, she'll answer your questions if we have enough time. Similarly with the Kubars guys, our fabulous cocktail guys, if you have some questions for them, also put them in the chat afterwards. And during the cocktail, we really want you to share your experiences, good or bad. And if you have a question or you have some good things to share, the host will ask you to unmute yourself, and you can share your good news about your cocktails with them then. So I'll hand over to Paul Arthur, a Regional VP of ANZ, to introduce our first speaker, Shara Evans. Over to you, Paul.
Thanks, Peter. Appreciate it. Good afternoon, everybody. It's my great pleasure to introduce Shara Evans to you today. And really today's session is going to be about a suspension of the day-to-day and starting to think about the art of the possible and understanding where the future and how the future may look in the next 5 to 10 years. So don't worry about what your day-to-day problems are. Start to think, Shara's going to take you on a journey of what the technology and future of the business world could look like. Just to give you some background, Shara is one of the world's top futurists. Drawing from her engineering background, she has a unique and intelligent perspective on how society is likely to respond to new technologies. She gets organizations and people like us to think outside of the box of what's available today and imagine what the world could potentially look like. Shara has crafted a unique career in technology industry with roles spanning software engineering, program management, sales, and marketing. She's the founder and CIO of Market Clarity, an award-winning technology analyst firm, and also founded Telesite, which she sold to publicly listed company UXC. She's a regular media commentator on technology issues and appearing on such shows as Sky News, The Drum, and the 7:30 Report, and is regularly quoted in publications as broad as the Financial Review, The Age, and the Sydney Morning Herald. I'd like to welcome Shara to this session today, and if you have any questions at any point during a question, please put them into the chat bot, and it'll be my pleasure to take them to Shara at the end of the session. Thank you. Over to you, Shara.
Thank you so much, Paul, and hello, everyone. I wish I could just get out there and say good day in person, but we're going to do it virtually, and hopefully I'll be able to see you in some of the video sharing that we have. Today, I'm going to be taking you on a ride into the future, and in particular, talking to you about some new technologies that will open up all kinds of new business opportunities for you. And I'm so thrilled that OutSystems has invited me to be their keynote speaker, because one of the things that you'll need to do to really take advantage of this is have in place an agile platform and an innovation team that allows you to make quick changes in reaction to this very, very rapidly changing world that we find ourselves living in right now. And as we're going on this journey, I'm also going to be sharing with you a bit about the yin and yang of technologies, because wherever there's something that's really good, there are also possible areas of problems. So let's talk about one of the most important technologies that is not just on the horizon, it's in the here and now. And many of you in your organizations may already be using artificial intelligence. It is the technology that is going to impact literally every single business and person in this world. So let me first give you a definition of how I use the term AI. I think of it as a big umbrella term. It encompasses things like machine learning and deep learning, which are techniques that we use to teach AIs, but it also includes natural language processing, whether it be text-based, voice-based, or even just reading through manuscripts. It includes things like emotion detection. It includes image detection, facial recognition, digital assistants, smart chatbots, robots, driverless cars, and a whole lot more. There are so many things happening in the world of AI. I'm going to share some of them with you today. But what is really important for you to understand that there's this now extra ingredient that's adding an accelerant to AI development, and that is quantum computing. There have been some real advances in the last year or so with quantum computing. And in fact, in Google's lab last year in 2019, they started to experience what they called double exponential growth. So if you've heard of Moore's law, where things change every 18 months, imagine that on steroids. You put that together with AI, super smart, super fast computing platforms, and we're going to see some very, very rapid changes in the world that we live in. Now, from a business perspective, AI has so many potential beneficial uses. If you think about your top clients, they actually represent maybe 1% of your customer base, but generate, on average, 18% of your total sales revenue. So one of the things that AI can help you to do is to deliver very highly personalized messages at the right time, at the right place, and on the right device. So in this little graphic, I'm showing an example of a young man walking in a mall, and he just happens to get a text about his favorite brand shirt that's on sale at a store that's a few meters away from him. What do you think the chances are, if he has time, that he might just go into that store and have a look at that shirt? Another example of where a completely different kind of company is using AI is the Royal Bank of Scotland. And they have all kinds of financial services. But one of the things that they've decided to do is to use AI to help completely revamp their platform, so that now if somebody has gone into overdraft a couple of times, that's a trigger for a financial advisor to give them a call and have a human conversation with them, but it's the AI that's actually in the background that's triggering it. Another completely different example from an industry in hospitality is the chain of Dorchester hotels, and they get thousands and thousands of reviews every month. Well, at least not during the pandemic, perhaps, but in normal times. And what they've done is they've used AI to condense these thousands of reviews into a 30-minute video that executives are able to view. And that's a really cool thing for AI to do. Chatbots are becoming more and more prevalent. We see them on a lot of websites. Most of them are text-based. A few of them are voice-based. One that came out a couple of years ago is called Wobot, and it was designed by psychologists and other researchers at Stanford University in the US. Initially, it was launched on Facebook Messenger, but now it's available on the App Store and Google Play. Unfortunately, not in Australia, because I did try to download it to play with it. But it is a cognitive behavioral therapy chatbot to basically load onto your smartphone or other machine and allow you to have a conversation with an AI that seems human-like, that is just asking you questions about how your day is going. It's all about personalization, and there are lots and lots of great examples of chatbots. But voice is really the next big thing when it comes to communicating with customers using AI. So I'm curious, maybe in the Q&A, or just raise your hands or show an emoticon. Let me know how many of you have a device like Alexa, or maybe Google Home, or maybe you use Siri or something on your phone and you talk to your devices. Well, guess what? It may not be a human that's talking to the device. There's a really funny story out of the UK where this parrot that you're seeing here, his name is Rocco, and he is a really cheeky parrot. He's owned by a lady named Marion, and he's learned how to precisely imitate her voice. And he chats back and forth with Alexa all day long and orders his favorite treats, which are things like strawberries and watermelon and broccoli, but he's even ordered things like kites and tea kettles. And every day Marion comes home and she has to check to see what Rocco may have ordered from Amazon to make sure that he hasn't, in her quote voice, ordered things that she really didn't want to order. Now, can you imagine if you had a fleet of parrots ordering from Amazon, what that would do to a deep learning database? It would definitely skew it. Another really interesting example of AI is from a company called IC Realtime, and they have an AI called Ella that is able to look at CCTV video and allow you to type in a natural language phrase to find specific things in anywhere from 1 to potentially thousands of CCTV cameras. So you could look for something like a man in a red shirt, and that's what you would type in, and would pull up the video frames of exactly what you're looking for. Of course, one of the prerequisites for this working properly is that the CCTV cameras need to have good imagery. If the image is grainy, then the chances of using the system successfully go down quite radically. But it's another really interesting use. However, when it comes to image recognition, there are ways that we can trick AI into thinking that an image is something that is completely different to what is perceptible to the human eye, literally by jiggling only less than 1% of the pixels in an image. So I could turn a school bus, jiggle an image, and make an AI think that it's an ostrich. Now, you may think that's funny, but if you think about having somebody who might be a cyber criminal take an image of a commercial jet and make it look like an ICBM, and you've got automated lethal weapons, well, you can see where the problem might be there. And it's not a fault of AI. It actually has to do with the underlying mathematical functions of how image recognition works. One of the things with AI is that researchers have discovered that when you feed AI databases using techniques like machine learning or deep learning, you're feeding it masses and masses and masses of data. More information than a human might even be able to read in an entire lifetime. And inherent in those databases could be social biases, incorrect facts, and all sorts of other things that will make an AI behave inappropriately. So one of the techniques that is being developed is something called reinforcement learning, where researchers are putting in hooks so that humans can actually start to help an AI learn when it's going on track and off track. And if it starts going off track, make corrections. So at this stage, we still need humans in the loop. And there are some really big ethical issues, because if an AI starts to behave in a way that's unexpected, there can be some very serious ramifications. Now, one of the things that is relatively new and that some of you may have heard of is called deep fakes. Now, with a deep fake, what you are doing is taking a video of a person, maybe me, but it's not really me. It's somebody who's pretending to be me, but using AI software, one can take that video and make it look like me, make it sound like me, and even using text editing, change the words in a really easy way. So I might say something in a speech that says, privacy is really important, and somebody could change it to say, privacy doesn't matter. Now, one of the ramifications of this is that imagine, as a hypothetical, that a hacker got into your video conferencing system, something that you're used to using all the time, and to you, it looks like you're talking to one of your coworkers or your clients, and they're asking you to share confidential information, and everything looks right. The person looks right, it sounds like them, it has a background that you recognize, and they're asking you about a company that you're thinking of acquiring. And of course, here in Australia, we've got ASIC laws and ASX laws that require market disclosure. And here you are chatting away to a person that you think is your colleague or a client, and it's not. And you've suddenly violated market rules. So who would be responsible in that case? Would it be the person who is tricked? Would it be the video conferencing company? Would it be the hacker, or would it be someone else? So one of the new jobs of the future that I think we're going to be seeing in the near-term future is a virtual reality or deep fake reality confirmer. Now, mind you, this kind of hack has not happened yet, but I think it could in the next couple of years. So now that I've scared you, let me give you some good, happy examples of where AI, and in this case, robots, which are the physical form of AI, can do a lot of good for us. This is Robert, and it is a rehabilitation robot made by a company called KUKA. And literally, it's able to help people like a physical therapist can, but without actually needing a human to get close to somebody who may be bedridden and need a lot of physical therapy, but there just isn't enough time for a therapist to visit them. Or perhaps they're unfortunately in a pandemic situation where close contact is not advisable. So this kind of robot can be hugely beneficial. There are also robots being designed, and all of them that I'm showing here are from CSIRO's Data 61 division, and they've designed a whole range of robots that literally can work underground, in caves and in subterranean tunnels, and places that may be dangerous to humans because of cave-ins or toxic gases and other things. So we've got this little pithy animation of hexapod. We also have on the bottom right something called a hover map drone, which lays down little hockey puck-like things that actually are communication systems so that it can converse with people that are up on the surface. And they even have down on the bottom a little tiny robot that they've tested in the middle of the Amazon jungle. These little gadgets can be really, really useful for a lot of industries, but in particular, the mining industry. Now, another really interesting development in robotics is something called imitation learning. And that is where a human being, somebody like you or me, gets into a virtual reality rig and has controllers and literally is able to control the spatial manipulations of robots. So this example is a real one. It's from a company called Kindred AI, and it's being used in warehousing. And what they have are these human pilots that control these robots using virtual reality. And they are literally teaching these robots how to pick up something that is maybe a piece of cloth versus handling a delicate piece of glass. Now, there are so many applications for this where humans who know how to do things can easily start to train robots to do new tasks that they were not designed to do or programmed to do, literally by imitating the actions of the humans that are controlling them. This is also what you call telepresence. And in the world that we find ourselves in now, where we're working from home, this same kind of concept could be applied to doing scientific experiments remotely from your home office. One of the other things that we're seeing because of the world that we're living in right now is an acceleration of many smart city trends, including the deployment of all kinds of Internet of Things sensors. And I'll give you an example from Chicago of both good and bad uses of these kinds of IoT sensors. So I was out there a couple of years ago, and in Chicago, they have this beehive-like looking cluster that you see that is sitting on light poles in 500 different neighborhoods in Chicago. And inside are sensors that are measuring all kinds of pollutants, barometric pressure, pedestrian traffic, vehicular traffic, ambient noise, you name it, it's measuring it. They're putting it out as an open source database, but it's also being used for city planners to make important decisions. But by making it open source, it's allowing developers to do things like design an app that could help somebody with asthma to navigate a path between their house and where they work that has the least number of pollutants and also some pedestrians around them so that they don't get mugged along the way. So that's a great example. But Chicago has also got another database that it's made open source, and it's a ride-sharing database. So they're collecting all kinds of information from ride-sharing companies like Uber, Lyft, and a whole bunch of others, and they're making that database open source. The problem there is that they're including very specific longitude and latitude from the pickup and drop-off spaces. And what that means is that, and I've done this multiple times over the last few years, by the way, you can copy and paste these coordinates, stick them into Google Maps, and it will show you pictures of a person's place where they got picked up, maybe their house, and where they went to, which might be an office or a shopping center. But if you stick this entire database into a GIS system, geospatial analysis system, or an SQL database, you can start figuring out people's patterns of lives. Now, there are really good reasons why city planners want this, but I would say from an open source perspective, you don't need to have the very precise GPS coordinates out in the public domain. And of course, we've got driverless cars. I'd like to show you a short video that is from a combination of Ford and one of their partners called Agility Robotics. And it's a delivery system which would enable contactless delivery through an autonomous vehicle. Now, this is still experimental right now, but it could be something that is on the near-term horizon. So you'll notice there's no human here that we're seeing. And this robot, it doesn't have a head. It reminds me of a droid that you'd see in Star Wars. Notice that it's done obstacle avoidance, hasn't tripped over anything, and you'll see in a moment that it's able to walk up steps and actually knock on the door. And by the way, also the person who is taking this package gets a text that says, by the way, the package is delivered. So what's going to happen to us with technology? Are we going to take technology into our own bodies and maybe become cyborgs. It might start to happen with things like smart contacts that have been trialed for, gosh, close to a decade now, and the time frame keeps moving further and further out. And these smart contacts are not like your normal contact lenses. They have all the kinds of applications that you would have on a smartphone, but using augmented reality. So you don't have a screen that you need to see it, and it recognizes gestures, but it also has biomedical applications as well. It's able to sense the chemicals in your tear ducts and show you that you might be low on insulin, and hey, it's time to get an insulin shot. That might be one of the first places that we see taking tech into our bodies, but that comes in and out. But what happens if we start going down the path of having implants inside of our own brains? And there are a lot of different research labs that have been working on this for a very, very long time. Most of the research that is happening is medical based, and the initial thrust has been to help people with diseases like Alzheimer's and dementia to be able to have a way of having a memory chip, if you like, in their brains so that they can start to regain access to memories which would otherwise be lost. But most famously, over the last number of years, you've probably heard about Elon Musk's company called Neuralink, where literally he started with this concept of, well, to compete against AI and robots, we're going to need to put this AI sublayer right above our neocortex and connect ourselves with the World Wide Web. And by the way, he's not the only one who's thinking along these lines, but he's actually been starting to invent these devices. So he shifted his initial focus a little while back from staving off the machines to the medical world and looking at putting devices in people's brains that would help someone who was completely paralyzed with a completely severed spinal cord nerve system be able to walk again through the use of these implants in their brain, which would be an amazing use. But then over the past year, he started to talk about doing things like being able to control your emotions using these chips that are also in your brains, and even streaming music. They've recently announced some experiments that they've done with pigs where they put them into pigs and then taken them out again. Now, imagine if you had an AI chip in your brain and you had this random thought and the chip was not able to discern between an action you really wanted to take and a fleeting thought. So let's say you're in traffic and somebody cuts you off. You might have a fleeting thought of, oh, that such and such, somebody should rear end them. But the AI chip thinks you really want to put the pedal to the metal and bang the back of their car. Who's going to be responsible for something like that? Is it going to be you or the AI chip inside your head? Or worse yet, what if a hacker got into the chip in your head and literally started hacking your mind, or somebody owned the chip that was harvesting every single one of your thoughts and on selling them to marketers or maybe even cyber criminals? So again, you know, this whole concept of technology can be used for good or it could be used for bad. And there's this yin and yang that we really need to think about. The world of the future is going to get even crazier as we start to think about this merging of med tech and technology. And there's some fascinating things happening in the world of precision medicine and genetic engineering. And in fact, with genetic engineering, there have been experiments that have been going on for quite a number of years to completely map out the human genome system. And there are about 3 billion base pairs. They haven't understood the functions yet of all of them. But there are a lot of scientists who believe that once we do that, we'll start to have control over our aging process. there's already been experiments by Salk Institute where they had a living mouse with this rapid aging disease called progeria, and through genetic manipulation, they were able to turn back the clock so that the mouse started to get younger. There are other scientists who believe that it's just a matter of time until we find the genetic sequence that actually causes aging, and that once we do that, we'll be able to set an age where we literally want to turn off the clock, maybe 20 years old or whatever age we pick, and we could have lifespans that go to 400 years or 800 years. Can you imagine working for 400 years? Or what about being married to the same person for 800 years? You might dearly love your partner, but just think about it. Over 800 years, your interests could diverge quite radically. It's opening up this whole new world of what it will mean to be human in the future. So with that, I'm concluding the formal part of my presentation, and I'm now going to stop screen sharing and open up to questions.
Thank you, Shara. That was great. Is there any questions that have come through from anybody in the chat? Let's have a quick chat. Because there hasn't, I've got quite a few.
Oh, go for it. Why don't you start, and then everybody else might pitch in.
Yeah, that's what tends to happen. I think that there was a lot of obviously subjects covered there. What do you think of all of the changes there? What's the most likely to happen in the short term, Shara? You know, some of the things obviously we talked about. You said, you know, we've mentioned a few of them a few times, and they keep pushing back, and they keep pushed back. Is there anything of those that you sort of would be banking on saying this is definitely going to happen within the next 3 or 4 years?
Look, artificial intelligence is already here.
Yeah.
And it's going to become more and more pervasive. So I would put, 100% bet that we're going to see more and more AI in all of its different shapes and forms, everything from facial recognition to robots and more chatbots and digital assistants and analytics, especially, big data analytics. There's so much that can be done by an AI that can literally analyze terabytes of data and point out things that would not be obvious to a person, and then let an informed individual, a specialist, let's say in the medical field, for example, look at the outputs from an AI and make a decision. So I'll give you a really specific example because I always like to ground things in reality. So one of the areas where AI is already being tested is in taking things like CT scans and MRIs, which are two-dimensional images, especially CT scans, and putting them into a three-dimensional format so that somebody examining those pictures now is able to look at the complete image of an individual and not only look at it in 3 dimensions, but form a time series of CT scans taken over, let's say, a 2-year period, and point out where they have noticed, the AI has noticed changes. And then it's up to the medical professional to say yes or no, that change is real or it's just an artifact. But it's something that a human being is not able to do on their own. So what the AI is doing is actually acting as an augmentation system for things that a medical professional is doing, but in a way that a human can't do it. It's an example that I like because it shows how AI and humans can work together very well.
That's really interesting. I think one of the things I also was very interested in, and it comes a bit from where my background was before, is you mentioned the ethical element of this. You know, just because we can doesn't mean we should. It's a phrase I hear, a few times. And where do you believe that that's going to sit? Is that going to come down to sort of government and regulation? Do you think it will become a self-managed within the industry, or how do you think we'll manage the ethical dilemmas?
Right now, there's not a consensus on exactly how it's being managed. So today, the decisions about how an AI behaves, let's say a driverless car, is completely up to the people that are designing that system. Now, obviously, we need some sort of ethical framework. So if you take the instance of a driverless car and you have an unavoidable accident, you've got some decisions to make. Do you hurt the passengers in the car if it's unavoidable? Or do you hurt a pedestrian that may have just walked in front of a car because they were too busy looking at their phone to bother looking up before they walked into the street? Or if you've got two cars that are about to collide, how do you decide which of the car's passengers are likely to get hurt the most? Is it based just on random? Is it based on the number of people in each vehicle, the age of the occupants, maybe the quote value to society of the occupants? It's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to ethics. Ultimately, I think it's going to have to be a society-wide decision about ethics that is not really in the technology domain right now. So right now, it's just up to the people who are programming it, and the ethics side is a bit of an afterthought. But I think that governments will need to have some sort of ethical framework, and industry certainly has gotten together and decided, yes, we need an ethical framework. But the question is, will the framework be the same in all the different parts of the world? And what happens if it's not? So there's still a lot of really thorny issues there.
Well, we haven't solved the trolley problem per se in our own for many years. So how AI is going to help us solve that would be interesting.
Exactly. And you know what? With the trolley problem, there really is no right answer. If someone's going to be hurt, then something has to make that decision.
Make that choice, yeah.
And with us humans, it tends to be a gut reaction. And I've actually had that happen to me where many, many years ago, I was in the US where I was born, and I was driving at 25 miles an hour, very slow, and it was an icy road. And I was looking at this cute little boy and girl, young kids, shoveling snow on the side of the sidewalk, just right ahead of me. And the next thing I knew, the little girl slid on ice right in front of my car. And it was just an autonomous reaction on my part where I took the steering wheel and didn't even look at what might be coming in the other direction and just literally steered it out of the way and was just praying, literally, that I did not hurt this girl. I ended up hurting myself and killing the car, but fortunately I didn't hurt the little girl at all. And her brother ran and went home, and an ambulance was called, and a big brouhaha was made about it, and they were really happy that I made the decision I did. And frankly, I'm very relieved that I made that decision too, because I don't know that I'd be able to live with myself, even if I had accidentally hurt this little girl through no fault of my own.
Okay. I did actually have a question come in from the team over in Perth. And the first, a couple of questions actually. The first one was around, when do you think that the concept of the cyborg, of human modification, would become more mainstream? I mean, I've got my own views on that, we already are cyborgs with things like pacemakers and those type of things into our bodies. But I guess people are talking about a more substantial integration.
Yeah. So, I would say, if we're talking about things like pacemakers or prosthetics, I wouldn't really put that in the cyborg category. I would talk about that more as a medical device. Where I talk about a cyborg is when you might decide that you're going to amputate your arm on purpose and replace it with a robotic arm. That's where you start to become more cyborgish, or where you put a chip in your head, not for medical purposes, but to give you some sort of competitive advantage, maybe to enhance your intelligence or to connect you to the web. Some of it is already starting to happen. And I think a lot of it is going to be based on people's willingness to take chances with relatively new technology. But in the first instance, I think it's going to happen in the medical sphere, where people will take implants into their bodies to solve medical problems. And if that proves to be safe and effective, then people who do not have medical problems will say, well, if it works for people who have dementia, then maybe it's worth me doing it too, to give me an extra added edge with my memory to excel in my field. So I think that that's the progression we'll start to see, and it's starting to happen already. But the time frame, we're probably looking 10 years out, before we'd start to see anything that's mainstream. And we need to mix in with that genetic engineering and genetic manipulation, because even though they're two completely different sciences, they sort of dovetail together.
Okay, it's interesting. I think that, I think that, like you say, I hadn't thought of it that way, where it's not a case of just replacing or substituting a failed component, but actually taking a perfectly working component and replacing it with an improved component. So that's an interesting point on it.
Yeah, and one of the places you might do it is in outer space. So if you think about where we are with space exploration, we now have reusable rockets. That's a reality. Mm-hmm. And there are lots of projects that are looking to establish colonies on Mars or the moon. And people might decide to alter their body physiology so that they can live in these non-terrestrial environments. And that might be another first instance of where people do it on purpose for, a pretty good reason.
That's an awesome idea. I hadn't thought of that at all. Cool. One of the other questions that came out of Perth was people asking about if you sort of had any thoughts around what the future of data storage is going to be like. If we start to mine human thoughts, that's going to create a huge amount of data. And how do we think we're going to think about managing that amount of data?
Look, that's a challenge. And I haven't looked specifically at storage technologies, but from some of the science podcasts that I've been listening to, I think, and this is just me projecting out, that we're going to find that crystals, many different kinds of crystals, are really, really good mediums for storage, and that they can actually hold a lot more data than any of the technologies that we're using today. It's really quite a sort of cutting edge scientific theory at this stage, rather than something that's here and now, but I think we could be going in that direction.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. Well, Shara, we don't have any more questions right now. I'd like to, really thank you for your time today.
Oh, thank you.
It's been amazingly insightful to take a moment away from our day-to-day challenges and really start to think and expand our minds into the potential of the future. I think what's very clear for me is there's some amazing opportunities going forward, but also some potential threats that those opportunities bring. And you've really opened up my eyes to a few things, and I hope the rest of the audience enjoyed the session as much as I did. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. And I would say to people, as you're looking to deploy these technologies, really think about what the potential unintended consequences could be. And if you do that as part of your design process, then we as humanity can avoid some of the pitfalls that I've described. And that's really my purpose for describing them, is so that we can avoid them, not to scare people. And thank you very much for having me today. And now it's on to drinkies and fun.
It sure is.
It is indeed. Thank you so much, Shara. Look, I was personally gobsmacked listening to you when we met a few weeks ago, and this just has confirmed that. But anyway, boys and girls, those who came here